So, have you ever had that feeling? You've got this brilliant idea, maybe a solution you just know is right, but it feels like nobody's really listening. Your insights kind of get lost, and, well, your chance to make an impact disappears. It's pretty common, right? That frustration. Having the knowledge, but, like, struggling to turn it into actual influence. Well, today in this deep dive, we're going to tackle that exact thing. We're looking at the journey of an engineering leader, and he shared pretty candidly, actually, his own experiences learning how to articulate his ideas effectively, how he navigated growth, made better strategic decisions. It's really interesting stuff. Our source is a talk he gave. He's the engineering and architecture lead at ARC. They build software for the hospitality industry. Think fancy hotels, the apps the staff use. And his personal story, that's really the foundation for all these insights.
Yeah, and what's compelling is, even though it comes from an engineering background, the wisdom here, it applies way beyond tech. We're pulling out some really practical ideas about communication, about learning, and especially about adopting new tech thoughtfully, stuff anyone can use, really.
Okay, so let's dig into his story. He started out as a junior engineer way back. Mobile games then meant Java,
Oh, yeah.
tiny little JAR files, like 30 kilobytes. And phones, they still had physical buttons.
Wow, that takes you back.
Right. And he actually told this story about learning Java basically overnight, just to get through the interview. But even after that, his early days were, well, pretty tough. He said he spent most of his time just trying to learn everything, the language, the system.
Just trying to keep his head above water.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
dealing with criticism, you
Yeah.
know. He mentioned lead engineers sometimes laughing at his code, telling him he wouldn't make it. Rough start. But maybe the biggest frustration, the thing that really got to him as a junior, he put it simply, no one cares about your opinion.
Oof.
It's a hard place to be, isn't it?
It really is. And it's so common, that feeling of being unheard when you're starting out. You haven't built that track record yet. You haven't established your expertise. So getting that initial credibility, that's a huge hurdle for a lot of folks.
Definitely. So a big turning point came with his promotion. Suddenly, things changed. He started getting invited into the room, those brainstorming meetings where they tackled the big problems.
Right, where the decisions happen.
Yeah. And finally, they were actually asking for his opinion.
Ah, progress.
Well, yes and no, because even though he was in the room and they asked, his ideas still often ignored. Other people's solutions got picked, and pretty often those solutions just failed.
Oh, wow.
And even when he was proven right, when he could kind of say, I told you so, he got no credit for it. You've probably been there, right? You have that gut feeling, you know the answer, but you just can't get anyone else on board. It's so frustrating.
Absolutely. So what did he figure out was the real issue there?
That was the key realization. He understood the problem wasn't necessarily his solutions. I mean, they were often right, though sometimes wrong. Sure, happens to everyone. But the real issue was his inability to explain why he was right, to articulate the reasoning.
Ah, okay. The justification.
Exactly. And that led to this personal promise he made to himself. Never again. Never be in a spot where he couldn't fully justify his position.
That's powerful. And you can see how that shapes his advice now. He tells his own teams now, make decisions that are data-driven, objective. It means, getting away from just gut feelings or personal preferences. Like he joked, the bike is forbidden. You can't just say, I like this one better.
Right. No bike shedding.
Exactly. Instead, you got to check alternatives. Really understand the pros and cons, look at the context, bring in the data, use your experience. That's how you make a solid decision, according to him.
Okay, but that brings up a question, right? How do you get good at explaining yourself, especially when you're starting out, when you don't have that deep experience yet? He called it a chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, I see that.
You lack experience, so people don't trust your solutions, which means you don't get the chance to gain the experience. It's a cycle.
A tough one to break.
So the usual advice we hear is, practice makes perfect. People talk about the rule of 10,000 hours to master something, like flying a plane or playing an instrument.
UI design, yeah.
Like a UI designer, starting with rough sketches, iterating, getting feedback, until they produce this, like, masterpiece, something amazing. It's all about repetition, honing the skill.
And he defined that kind of deliberate practice very specifically. It's about minimizing variance, making things perfectly repeatable. Like you said, a pilot wants every takeoff to be exactly the same. Flawless, a concert pianist. Every performance of a piece should sound identical. Mastery through perfect repetition.
Okay, so here's the challenge he throws out. In software, or lots of creative fields, do you really just repeat the exact same thing over and over in a way that lets you achieve that perfect identical result? He argues that often, if you are trying to do that rigid kind of practice in these fields, you might actually be doing it wrong.
Interesting point. Why is that?
Well, his point is that the goals are usually different. Think about software product companies.
Okay.
They want differentiators, right? Not just perfect copies of what competitors are doing.
Yeah.
You're not trying to minimize variance. You're often trying to create something new.
Right. You want novelty, not just repetition.
And agency work. That's even more obvious. Agencies deal with all sorts of clients, different industries, unique problems every time.
So variance is maximized there, not minimized.
Exactly. The whole point is often discovering new problems and finding new solutions, not just stamping out the same thing perfectly.
Okay, so if rigid, deliberate practice isn't always the answer, what's his alternative?
He calls it deliberate learning.
Deliberate learning. Okay, how's that different?
Well, deliberate learning kind of flips the script. Instead of minimizing variance, it's about maximizing exploration.
Ah, okay. Going wide.
Yeah, seeking out the unknowns, discovering new stuff, broadening your understanding. He compared it to a breadth-first search in a graph, exploring all the nearby options before going super deep on just one.
So less about perfecting one thing, more about exploring many things.
Precisely. And the ways he suggests doing this deliberate learning, they're actually pretty accessible. Things like going to conferences, local meetups, actually listening to different opinions, even if you disagree.
Discussing ideas.
Yeah, maybe talking it over with colleagues, maybe even, down the pub. Just actively sharing, listening, asking questions. He basically says, if you're doing that kind of stuff already, you're probably ahead of the game.
That's encouraging. It's not some secret, complex technique.
Not at all. Now, shifting gears a bit, but still connected. He also talked about systemic thinking, and he drew insights from a really interesting source, a book called The Goal by Eli Goldratt, published way back in 1994.
Oh, I know that one. Classic.
Yeah, before manufacturing software was really a big thing. And it's all about applying the theory of constraints.
Right, bottlenecks.
Exactly. The story is about this guy who has to save a failing factory in like 30 days. And his big insight isn't about making every single machine run faster. It's about zooming out.
Seeing the whole system.
Yeah, focusing on the overall flow and finding the bottlenecks, the things slowing everything down and fixing those. It's all about maximizing throughput for the whole system.
And it's amazing how those ideas from, 30 years ago, they directly connect to modern stuff like DevOps culture and agile methods.
Totally. It shows some principles are just timeless.
They really are. Systems thinking.
So, connecting this back, the speaker pulled out another key bit of wisdom from Goldratt, which is, a technology should only be adopted if it addresses a specific limitation in the system.
Okay.
And he really emphasized one specific limitation. It's not about chasing shiny new tech, it's about targeted problem solving.
That makes sense. Avoid tech for tech's sake. So how do you apply that?
Well, this leads to 4 really critical questions Goldratt apparently used, questions you should ask before adopting any new technology or approach.
Okay, let's hear them.
First one, what is the technology? Simple enough, but what does it really do at its core? His example was Compose Multiplatform. Its core thing is letting you write Kotlin, use familiar APIs, and avoid touching Swift code for iOS. Understanding that basic function.
Got it. Know what it actually is. What's second?
Second, what specific limitation does it address? How does it actually solve that problem? For Compose Multiplatform, he points out, the answer is kind of tied right into what it is. It addresses the limitation of needing separate code bases and teams for Android and iOS.
Right, the problem it's built to solve.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Third.
And third, how do we currently cope with this limitation without the technology? What are your current workarounds, your existing processes or rules?
Okay, so what's the status quo?
Yeah, so for cross-platform mobile dev, maybe you cope by hiring separate Android and iOS teams who have to coordinate constantly.
Or maybe using other tools like Flutter or React Native.
Right, which, as he notes, often still requires some native expertise anyway for those bits you can't do in the cross-platform framework. So understanding your current coping mechanisms.
Okay, current state, current workarounds. What's the fourth question?
The fourth one. He said this is the most important part, the part that a lot of people are missing.
Ooh, okay, lay it on us.
The fourth question is essentially, what new problems might arise if we don't adopt this, and what new opportunities open up if we do?
So it's about the consequences of inaction versus the potential benefits, the delta.
Exactly. Thinking about the cost of sticking with the old way and the value unlocked by the new way, He used that pre-computer production facility example again to really drive this home.
How so?
Well, think about planning production and ordering materials manually. He described how that could take a full week of painstaking calculation.
Wow, a week.
Yeah. And because it was manual, it was super error-prone.
Yeah.
And mistakes were costly.
Right. Order too much, you waste money on materials and storage.
Order too little, you can't deliver to customers, lose sales, maybe damage relationships. Huge risks.
And that whole week-long process, it fundamentally limits how you even think about planning, doesn't it?
Absolutely. If it takes a week just to crunch the numbers, planning really far ahead, like for a year, becomes incredibly risky because small errors compound.
Mm-hmm. And planning for really short cycles is hard too because the planning time itself eats up so much of your operational window.
Exactly. So when you ask that fourth question about the computer,
Right. Not adopting it meant being stuck with this slow, risky, limiting process. It created ongoing problems of waste, lost sales, and massive manual effort.
but adopting it, it wasn't just automating a task.
No, it completely changed the game. It transformed their ability to plan. Suddenly, they could be more precise, more agile, plan further ahead with more confidence.
It turned this huge operational drag into a potential strategic advantage. That's the power of asking that fourth question and really understanding the transformation that technology enables.
It unlocks totally new possibilities you couldn't even consider before. That's a great illustration.
So yeah, as we wrap up here, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? From that uh, personal struggle of the junior engineer just trying to get heard,
Mm-hmm.
through that strategic shift, moving from just practice to deliberate learning,
Right, maximizing exploration.
and finally landing on this deep wisdom about systemic thinking and being really thoughtful, really critical about adopting new tech.
Mm-hmm.
And the thread through it all seems to be that need to explain why, not just what you think,
Mhm.
but the reasoning behind it.
Absolutely. And I think the big takeaway is that real growth, real impact, it doesn't usually come from just doing the same thing perfectly over and over again. It comes from exploring, from understanding the whole system, finding those bottlenecks,
Yeah.
and being super critical about why you're adopting something new. Does it solve a real specific problem you have right now?
So thinking about all this, the deliberate learning, those 4 questions for adopting new stuff, it leaves you with a thought, doesn't it? For you, listening right now, what's an unknown you could deliberately explore next? And maybe more pointedly, what specific limitation in how you work or in your current projects could a truly new perspective or a thoughtfully chosen technology actually address?